Hi everybody, and welcome to our next episode of our Lead Strong series. I'm delighted to again be joined by my lovely co-host Stephanie Hopper, who will introduce herself shortly. My name is Lloyd. I'm the Director of Leadership Assessment at Capfinity. Capfinity is a market leader in strengths-based assessment and development. We have been disrupting the industry for the past 16 years, from early talent through to leadership. Steph and I work specifically on our Altitude solution, which is our solution for leadership assessment and development. And this series of Lead Strong is all around discussing the trials and tribulations of being a leader and building out leadership in industry. We are joined today by two fantastic guests. I will hand over to Steph to introduce herself and our wonderful guests today. Thanks, Steph.
Thanks, Celine. Hi everyone. As Celine said, I'm Steph Hopper. I head up Development Solutions at Capfinity. Really looking forward to today's episode where we're focusing on self-insight. More from Celine on that shortly. But I'm really thrilled. We've got two guests who I am very fond of, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and maybe tell us a little bit about why they're passionate about the subject of leadership. So let me come to Rachel first. So Rachel, over to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Global Head of Talent at an organisation called Lloyd's Register, which is a global organisation in ostensibly the shipping sector, but we're professional services. There are about 8,000 people globally, spread right across the globe. So it's a nice, manageable number. I've only been in the organisation a year. I've never met any of my colleagues face to face, so this is really exciting for me. Prior to that, lots of experience in IT sector and financial services, and really what I'm passionate about in the space, in the leadership field, is I get to work with some incredible people, often who've got to that point in their careers by being great at a particular profession, but have never really thought about the wider leadership. And it's an amazing privilege to get to see how these leaders develop into the broader human leaders that they're capable of being.
Lovely. Thank you, Rachel. I love the fact that you've not met anyone in person, because that must mean you don't know how tall they all are. So you'll be able to line them up when you finally meet them. Let's go to Ellie now. Ellie, perhaps you'd introduce yourself.
Sure, thank you, Steph. So I'm Ellie Tomlins. I'm currently at Tate and Lyle, where I look after strategy, culture, human capital strategy, that is, culture, talent, learning, organisational change, and I also business partner our innovation teams. So fair amount going on there. Tate and Lyle's no longer in the sugar business. Everyone associates it with golden syrup, but actually it sold the sugar business and it now makes crazy substitutes for all sorts of health products like sweeteners, texturizing products, and basically it's in most of the things in your kitchen, but you would never know about it. It's about 5,000 people, really interesting, complex global organization. Previously, I've been in HR for about 15 years. Before that, I was in consulting, which is probably where we used to come up with great ideas and then have to work with the leadership team to work out how to change themselves in order to deliver them, which is kind of where I fell in love with this notion that leadership is quite important, because without great leadership, actually, organizational strategy stays on a page, it doesn't get executed, you don't drive it into the organization, and actually quite a lot of what you end up doing is working out how the leaders need to shift in order for something to be realized. And so that's where I fell in love with that notion, decided that HR was the best place to pursue that kind of work, and then spent a fair amount of time at Thomson Reuters, where I met the lovely Steph, and then at Whitbread, where I looked after group talent and OD for 5 years.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ellie. I'm always astounded by the number of hats that any of us wear at any given time. It's wonderful, but lovely when you have that many things in your remit, because then you can look at how everything aligns. So thank you, Rachel. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Ellie. Really privileged to have you both here this afternoon talking about this. So self-insight is the focus of this episode. I'd just like to position that as a topic before we go into our first kind of question. So we've looked at self-insight for a number of years. It's within our model of leadership strengths, and we know that in order to lead other people, really that has to start with yourself and understanding yourself and knowing who you are in order that you can help other people to achieve that. And Steph and I often talk about self-insight or self-awareness being the meta skill needed for leadership in the 21st century. Like, it just goes across everything. And I was reading some research published by the HBR earlier on this year, which showed that self-insight as a leadership capability was the most influential in the business's kind of performance commercially. And we know also that self-insight has a link to agility and growth mindset, which are also really important for leadership potential. So there's tons of research out there to show that it's important for established leaders and aspiring leaders coming up. But we also know there's a bit of a gap, right? So Hayes did some research last year. Of the 17,000 people that they assessed, only 19% of females had a level of self-insight which we would deem to be kind of adequate or needed, and 4% of males. So clearly there is a misfit there between what we would want in our leaders and the level of self-insight and what there is. So I guess to get the conversation really started today, I'm interested in your views as to why you think self-insight and a leader having that self-insight has such a profound impact on the performance and the commercial success of the organisation that they work for. So perhaps Ellie, coming to you first, what's your views on that?
It's a great question, Celine. I guess a couple of things come to mind. But firstly, the irony, because of course many of us have worked with many leaders who are actually not very self-aware, who in the short term can be incredibly successful, especially commercially. And actually, if you stay in HR long enough, they're often the ones where you're sort of mopping up things behind them and sort of sorting out things that have gone wrong, and often completely unconsciously, right? So often it's a conversation that was meant to be a good thing and has ended up derailing because the leader's not completely unaware of their impact or the unintended consequences of something that they've kind of put into the organization. So for me, the kind of the correlation is, for the long term, for sustainable performance in the medium to long term, that's where self-insight is disproportionately important, because the leaders who really understand themselves are good at a number of things, not only putting people around them that compensate for the things that they don't have. They're really good at understanding their impact on other people, and they're normally really good at leading change because they're helping people navigate. They know where.
We've lost Ellie there for a second.
I think we've lost Ellie, haven't we?
Frozen. Oh, that's a shame. Full flow, Ellie. Not to worry. Hopefully Ellie will return to us shortly. Yeah, I think, the things that Ellie was just sharing there were really important. One of the things which it was making me think of was when where we can see self-insight be overplayed. And Rachel, I'll maybe kind of pick on that. Oh, Ellie, you're back. No? Oh, shame. Rachel.
She's frozen again.
Yeah, frozen again. Rachel, I'll come back to the overplay piece in a minute. But as the question, as it started, what was your view? What's your view on that?
Well, I was nodding. I
can see you nodding
at what Ellie was saying. I think just to build on that, really. People want to connect human to human, and actually that inspires people. So a human leader is going to inspire followership, and I think that's one of the key differences. So people can be successful and be commercially successful in the short term, but they may not gather those followers in the longer term. So there's that human to human thing, and to be aware of others, you first need to be self-aware.
That's it.
And that's really important. And then what we need to do, linking to the commercial piece, is if we want to treat our customers brilliantly, we need to start with our own colleagues first. And there's a load of research out there that says great employee experience naturally leads to great customer experience. So the two naturally flow on. So I think that's really critical. And having that self-insight is not just about the positive stuff that you know about yourself, but also sharing some of the stuff that you're not great at. So
Absolutely.
being vulnerable and all of that, all of the stuff that goes with that, showing, admitting to what you don't know, or what mistakes that you have made along the way. In my experience of leaders who engender great followership, they have those qualities about them.
Yeah, no, fascinating. I think you're right. I think self-insight is a cornerstone of those two, of humility and vulnerability, which we know in recent years is coming through the research as being really important, and the link to authentic leadership. So it's a stepping stone to all these, really important paradigms which are proving to be having a big impact. Ellie, welcome back.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Genuinely typical. The Wi-Fi goes down.
Welcome to remote working. It's not
Indeed.
the first time. It will not be the last. We are delighted that you're back. We were just so sad because you were in full flow and we were all hanging on every word.
And there's every chance I carried on talking for a while.
That's okay. Anything, having just caught the tail end of what Rachel was saying, anything to add in terms of Rachel's perspective?
Well, just echoing a couple of points, I think, because I think the authenticity and the ability to be vulnerable is so important to create psychological safety, which allows other people to be vulnerable. And without that, you really don't get the innovation, you don't get the experimentation, you don't get the kind of courage and curiosity that's so important to business success in a very, very kind of crazy, disorderly, disrupted world. And so that kind of straight line from self-insight into authenticity into business results is all about encouraging the right environment where people can experiment, be themselves, and actually go for it in terms of the kind of risk profile that each business is looking for.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, can I just wanted to add to that. I think it's more important now than ever in many industries, because in the past, many businesses haven't had the sort of competitive nature that they have now. So more incumbents coming into different industries, they haven't necessarily had to be as commercial as they are now. So it's more important now than it ever has been in the past to have that a trait in leaders.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
So, Tasha Urich has done quite a lot of research in self-awareness, and she says that 90% of us believe we're self-aware. Probably some of those leaders Ellie was referring to at the beginning.
Oh, yeah,
who maybe
absolutely.
aren't quite as self-aware as we thought, are probably part of that category. But then arguably all of us are as well. But what she found was that in her research was that actually, in truth, only 10 to 15% of us are. So whether that research, we believe it or not, I guess there's a gap between people's self-perception and the reality of where their self-awareness is. So I'm just really interested to understand, what have you seen as the most effective methods, I guess, for helping leaders to develop and improve self-insight? Rachel, let me come to you first this time.
Well, first of all, I think there's a really interesting question here, which is self-insight what you know about yourself, or is it what others see in you? And those two things can be quite different. And I wonder if that quote is something about, well, I know I'm like this and other people are wrong. Who is right in this kind of context? But that aside, I found that actually one of the most powerful things is to help develop that in leaders is to create a space of trust and peer support, where people can work, where leaders can work with other leaders in a safe environment to expose some of that stuff and to start talking and digging into it. So that's one thing, and the other thing for me that's incredibly powerful is, of course, coaching, and certain elements of coaching, which is could be around holding up that mirror to people to really see, well, you say you're like this, but do you know what? I just heard you say something that came out quite differently. So are you really sure that people are hearing what you're intending them to hear? So I think those things are key. I think there's also something around in coaching and in small groups, helping people unlock some of those limiting beliefs about themselves. You know, I mentioned at the beginning, lots of these leaders have been experts in a particular field and have gone up and have grown up. Some of them, I often find with leaders who haven't gone through tertiary education, that they have this kind of belief that they can't do strategy because they didn't learn it at university. And actually, it's around unlocking some of that stuff that just isn't necessarily the case.
Lovely. It's interesting, your first point, Rachel, because Uric, I think, talks about internal self-awareness and external self-awareness, and she talks about, you know, the need to calibrate the two. So there's our own perception of ourselves, but then there's what other people, you know, see in ourselves. And I kind of feel like, for me, like courage and bravery are so important in building self-awareness, because it's having the courage to ask the questions that you might not want to hear the answers to, but you're open to do that, which is so important. So important. Thank you. Ellie, what are your thoughts on building self-insight for leaders and the most sort of effective methods?
Well, I mean, there's lots of methods you can try, and I certainly agree with, you know, both your point about internal and external, and Rachel's kind of key point about trust and psychological safety, actually, because for me, there's a couple of themes that are relevant here. So you can't replace quality feedback and insight, whether that's through 360 methods, whether that's through coaching methods, or whether the kind of real-time contextual feedback is everything in terms of building self-awareness. But that can't go in, and it can't get heard unless the individual is centered, feeling comfortable, feeling in a trusting place. So that kind of psychological safety and knowledge that the feedback is coming with the right intent is absolutely everything in order for it to be able to be actioned and heard and felt on. The other theme that was coming to mind when I was reflecting back on what I've seen really work is self-awareness can be really contextual, right? So an individual that shows up as, you know, rude and abrasive and aggressive in one cultural organization, when they move companies, can be seen as quite normal, actually. And so a lot of the calibration element is really, really important. And so kind of contextual, continuous feedback that's really helping someone understand themselves in their environment is really important, which is one of my favorite techniques actually is often about experience. And one of the things I think of over the course of a career for executives is, have they been tested outside of the context in which they grew up and are comfortable? I mean, grew up in the broadest sense. That can be cross-cultural experiences, that can be trying different business units, that can be trying different functional specialisms. But without that kind of test of yourself in a completely different world, actually you probably don't recognize the boundaries of what's true to you and retains in any environment versus what did you know about yourself because it worked in the environment that you were in. So the kind of curiosity about self and curiosity about the environment you're in is the single most important indicator in terms of building self-insight and awareness, in my opinion. And putting people consciously into different environments to explore that can be really helpful. You know, I once had the privilege of doing lots of immersion work and taking executive cohort out to India to explore their leadership in a very, very different environment. And we took them into the slums, and we took them all around, and they met all sorts of different leaders who were working in such different environments themselves. And that caused a sort of calibration discussion and a set of insight discussions that were really quite different than if we'd sort of left them in a comfortable domestic situation. And so talking to people outside your world, always disproportionately helpful, and having then coaching support feedback that really underlines that it can be amazing in terms of getting those breakthrough moments.
I agree.
I love that.
It's interesting, we were just saying, Ellie, around just exposure and seeing new things. And I was talking to an old client this morning who had gone into the office for the first time last week. And I did the same thing a few weeks ago. And we were saying just the experience of being on a train, I mean, just a train into the city and seeing different things outside of your home, and the energy and the breadth, even just something as simple as a train journey, right, it was so powerful. So I think that's a really interesting thing for us to think about as we transition to hybrid working, and actually the intricacies of what we lose from a leader development perspective by the virtue of the changing environment. That's interesting. Steph, I wonder if it may be useful, mainly because I just don't want to let it go because I'm fascinated by it, but this theory of, you know, can we get too much of a good thing? And I just, from my personal experience of working with leaders that I work with, sometimes I see them on a bit of a pendulum. So you can have someone who starts with maybe not having quite good self-insight. You do a lot of work with them to kind of increase that. And then this experience of being almost frozen from, you know, like the matrix pill you've taken almost, and then not knowing, kind of being frozen, not knowing what to do. Have you seen that, Rachel? First, have you seen that in your work, and how can we help people who that happens to?
Yeah, I think there's something around timing and helping drip feed, because I think just bombarding people with stuff, they can freeze and kind of go, yes, and I've been successful at what I do without all of this stuff.
Yeah.
So I might choose to ignore it. So we can't, as much as we'd like to, determine what's going to be that light bulb moment for any individual. So, you know, again, I'll bring it back to coaching, which I do both within and outside of my organization, but it's picking on, let's say you can't fix it all. What are you going to choose to do something about? And if helpful, I can use an example of my own that you know was a bit of a moment for me. So I, you know, early on in my career, I was a bit of a micromanager, all in pursuit of perfection, of course. And I would regularly work 16-hour days, and there was a kind of honor about it, and I loved it. And I'm sure the people that worked for me didn't. I didn't expect them to work long hours, but I'm sure they didn't. And of course, I knew what was the right thing to do, but it didn't mean I did it. And the light bulb moment for me was I went to a lecture about sleep and what lack of sleep can do to you. And that it suddenly dawned on me that I was doing no good to my own brain, my own well-being, and therefore, by association, the well-being of my team. And almost overnight, I kind of went, right, I am not going to do this anymore. I need to be able to get rid of some of this workload, some of which I'm creating myself. Anyway, to cut a very long story short, it ended up in my team being much more productive and working much fewer hours. So it was a kind of, it's got to be at the right time. And I know that doesn't directly answer your question. So maybe.
No, it's useful. No, it's all, no, it does make sense. It's around, finding your own path to how you use it, how you gain those experiences. That sleep lecture sounds like the equivalent of a horror movie for me with 2 children under 4. I will not be listening to that for a number of years. But I'm glad that it worked for you and stopped those habits that you were in. Ellie, just anything on that piece before I begin to wrap up the session? Anything?
Well, just a thought that popped into my head when you were asking about, you know, can it be too much of a good thing? I do think there's a shadow side to everything, right?
Yeah.
So and if you go back to the 2 forms of self-awareness, someone who is very internally focused and gets very introspective has a massive tendency to derail within overthinking, and that you need to be able to know yourself well enough to catch yourself and work out how to manage that pattern. And that's where having a coaching partner, having a therapist, having all sorts of people that help you work through that is really important. And then on the other side, people that are overly focused on what other people are saying about them can actually dwell into people pleasing. And actually that's where, again, feedback from the system, feedback from the organization is really, really important in terms of being able to stand up straight and saying, I know when not too much is a good thing. And some of that builds with experience, right? I mean, that some of these are maturity points that build over time, and actually you probably need to go through some of it to work it out. But having structured support around it, having the right time, and understanding your own patterns, so you can call your triggers, and you know when you're heading into the wrong when you're heading for a derailer is very, very important.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, thank you. Wonderful. So thank you so much for the discussion today. I would just would like to summarize the kind of key takeaways from our conversation before giving each of you a chance to leave some final pearls of wisdom for our audience. I think it is a really interesting topic, isn't it? Self-insight, and I feel like we could fill a whole day with talking about this. Some of the things that have really struck me from our conversation. The first is, we know that self-insight has an impact on the commercial success of an organisation that the leader's working for and with. And Ellie, I liked how you described this kind of line between self-insight to authenticity, which wraps up humility, vulnerability, and then the impact on colleagues, and Rachel, as you said, then the impact on customers. So it's this wonderful golden thread that we see start with the leader and kind of have this exponential in output out. It was really lovely to kind of talk about that. We then talked about the kind of hints and tips and things we can do to help leaders develop their self-insight. And I heard a lot around creating a safe space and a safe environment for leaders to gain feedback, that feedback being really critical for calibrating their view of themselves, other people's views of themselves, and what's needed in that particular environment. And we just finished the conversation with talking about the shadow, as you said, Ellie, the shadow that self-insight can throw, because it is possible, I think, to have too much of a good thing. So helping leaders to navigate that and to swing the pendulum back to a position where they don't lose confidence or don't become frozen in what they do is really important. Fascinating conversation. Ellie, I'll come to you first with any final words on this topic.
I guess just two quick thoughts. One is, when all of us get into overwhelm and stress, understanding yourself well enough to be able to catch it and put support structures around ourselves is probably the single most important factor in terms of being able to navigate that. And then the second coaching thought, I suppose, which is what I use all the time when I'm talking to people about how to work on their self-insight, it's to come back to curiosity and ask them to get really, really nosy about themselves, about their impact on others, and just to continually ask the questions of themselves and of others about how they're doing in the moment. And that there's no replacement for that really in my book. And I think that's kind of my single to-do around it, is just to keep asking.
Be nosy. I love it. I can get on board with that. I feel like I've made a career out of being nosy. So that sounds good to me. Rachel, parting words from you.
Couple of things too. One is, look, we all want to follow somebody who knows who they are and where they're going. And just picking up on your shadow point, Celine, we just all ought to be, as leaders, ought to be aware of our shadows, both the positive and the negative, because actually, everything we do is multiplied to the people who are following us. So just be aware of the shadow that you cast for good and for bad.
Wonderful, really important. Thank you, Rachel. And Steph, final words from you.
Yeah, it was something Rachel said reminded me of when I trained to be an exec coach, and we had to define our coaching model. And I've, to be honest, forgotten what that was now. But you reminded me, Rachel, when you said that classic phrase, which is holding the mirror up. But what I remember was my coaching model was about tilting the mirror. And it was about I used to talk about, you know, in a changing room, you've got those mirrors on the wall and they very subtly tilt. And actually for me, the power when we're all coaches here, but when we're giving feedback or we're sharing back with someone, is not just to play back exactly what we've heard, but just to tilt that mirror very slightly, because I think that's the thing that can make the difference.
My mum has one of those mirrors at home. It's my favourite place to try clothes on. I mean, I need to get one. It's amazing. I love it. Okay, well, thank you all so much for a really wonderful session. And we're back again in 2 weeks' time for our next session. That is looking at happiness and engagement at work. Bound to be another good conversation. Enjoy your days, enjoy your weeks. Thank you again to Rachel and Ellie for joining us. And thank you, Steph, for being a wonderful co-host as usual. Bye, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.